8.5.x version. I have not really tested the Chrome, latest version of the Chrome in this environment. Then you can, once you have that, so you can see that this is the problem we have. So we need to first ensure our system is compatible with the operating system that we are using. When I say system, it is about the RFT version that we have and with the background, that is environment on which this RFT is loaded. Right? If I want to add a browser, I can click on add, I can add the browser as well. So everything is possible over here. So I stopped it, I closed this browser as well. So now this is what the configure is. So these two are most important parts. Now the third important portion is the one which we talked yesterday, continuation of this to today. So here I am opening now. The left hand side that you see, that is called object classes. The right above, the select the test domain is the most important. So in a certification, the question asks is where you can configure the recognition. Can you configure recognition properties? Older version 7.0x before 7.x doesn't have the support of configuring the object recognition properties. You don't have option to configure. From 8.x onwards, you have a facility to configure the object, that is object recognition properties. Right? The first is, let us take one at a time. You can see if I open the test domain, the test domain is what the technology I was talking about yesterday. So these are all the technologies by default we support. Right? You can see now ActiveX, Flex, HTML, Java, .NET, he supports .NET as well, PDF, SAP, Sybil, UIA, Windows. So in case of calculator, I automatically use this Windows. You can always ask me, can I need to select the domain name before I start recording? You don't have to select any of the domain. By default, he will choose the most appropriate domain and then start recording. What he is trying to say here is, you have predefined, these are all the left hand side that you see, select the object class. This is what I was talking about as standard classes. These are all the standard classes pre-created for each of the add-ins. The domain, test domain is what I was talking about, plugin or add-in. The terminology used in RFT is domain, test domain. So test domain is nothing but add-in or a plugin. This is the generic term used in the automation technology. Specific term with reference to the RFT is test domain. So this Windows, if I go to Java, you can see these are all the Java classes. Right? All these are Java classes. Standard Java classes supported by so-called other RFT. So for example, RFT 8.5.x, that is the version that we are using. During the release time, you might be having a Java environment of 1.10 or that version. That standard controls are automatically default available for you to use. Any new controls may not be available, you need to upgrade the version. So that is what the first level of upgrade happens in the RFT. They don't change the technology, they don't change the base product, they will keep adding to the newer version of the technologies available in the market. If I go to .NET, these are all the .NET controls that are available. Right? Even though add-ins are visible to you, even if you see the SAP add-in is visible. But can I use SAP application? Answer is no. Because I need to purchase the license first. Without purchasing, because the configuration tool is the key portion that you need to manage the application, new application that you want to work on. This is what the standard classes I was talking about is for. The class name, whatever the class name defined over here, if developer uses this class name, you can manage it without any problem. Then the complication of automation is very, very less. When developer uses the name which is not part of this, which is not part of the class name that you see is in the left hand side, then we call it the complication starts actually. That is where the actual complication starts. Right? This is for your understanding. Now we come to the right hand side. That is this middle portion of the object recognition. Each of the class, I will go with Windows since we are all mostly aware of that. So I'll go with Windows. In Windows, let me take a button, push button. Right? When I select the push button, you can see the default available properties, object recognition properties. This I was talking about when we use the name, we use name property. If in a different project, we use employee ID. The same concept over here, which are all the properties by default he uses. So he uses class, 100% is the weightage for that class. That means if class is not, you cannot remove the class. You can see now you cannot remove the class as well. Right? The class is by default, every object that you see in the left hand side is having a class. Class is nothing but a group as I said. So this class is a mandatory for all the objects. Apart from this, he identifies object with class index. He identifies object with name. He identifies object with text. These are all the three other properties he uses. And you can see the weightage. What is the purpose of weightage? How the weightage is used is what the scores is all about. That is our last topic of today's class, most probably. Substance. When you are trying to listen to the sessions, sometimes we need to assume the values as x, y, z if I want to solve an expression in a mathematics. Right? Then we finally get to know the exact answer of what is x, what is y, what is z. Right? If I try to know x, y, z before I apply it, it becomes too complicated. First of all, you cannot do it. So there are certain things. RFT has been designed with certain predefined technology or architecture. We are not in a position to understand why they use this architecture, or we cannot question the architecture, the way the architecture is used by rational functional testers. What we are trying to do here in the teaching is, we are trying to understand with accepting the architecture given by rational functional tester is valid and acceptable and not questioning that architecture. Now, when we are trying to understand that architecture behind the scenes, we are assuming whatever the values are given, etc., we accept as it is. We are not questioning that. Why class index 50%? Why not 100%? Why name 75%? Why not 80% or 100%? We are not trying to question that. Right? We accept as it is. With that acceptance, we try to understand the problem, and if there is a problem, we try to change this value, see whether that problem can be resolved or not. Right? So, in the older version, this exposure to this object property configuration tool was not available at all. There was a serious problem on managing that object. So, that is at least being taken care. Right? So, we accept technology as it is. I can add a new object as well. If you see in the bottom screen, I can add a new object for a Windows application. If I go to the HTML, I'm just moving on to the HTML. You can see now HTML also has a button. When I say HTML, again I repeat, don't confuse with a technology called JSP, Java or a .NET or a Python or any other technology that is possible in web browser. right? Web browser only recognizes HTML content, right? So buttons, calendar, palette, combo box, this is our list box, right? Combo box recognizes with this property set. Button recognizes with this property set. You can see now there is a property difference between a button and a combo box, right? I selected a button. You have totally 3 plus 3, 6 properties used to identify the object, and the recognition values, that is actual weightage, varies for each of the objects. I go to the combo box. Now the 6 has become only 5. The name property is missing. The weightage is also defined in a different way, right? So the name property was missing onto the new object. So that is also possible. So this configuration is the main asset for any of the so-called automation tool. When you go to the open source tool, you don't have such features. Right now, I'm not changing anything. I go with the default as it is available. Right? These are all some of the objects available for different object technologies. Domain is the technology name. You can see HTML table. This is the object. So now, having said that, once you recognize this, he goes recognizing the object with actual weight, default weight, property name. These three are available. Every object, there may be thousands of properties, but there are certain properties used for recognition, and only those properties are used for recognition. You can see now height of an object or weight of the object are not used for recognizing the object. That's very clear. If I want to add, for example, I like to add a property. I click over here. I can add a property that I want to do. Right? Provided that property has to be available within that object. So that is most important part. So now I cancel this. So I've come to this object recognition. This is the portion we may be concentrating today. Now we have configured the application. We have configured the environment. So under environment, you also have a Java environment. What is the Java JRE? Where it is, what is the path? You can see all those available. Eclipse platform. In case if you are working on an Eclipse application, you can manage this. For example, if you are working on an Android platform, and that Android is also an Eclipse J2ME, you can select that Eclipse platform, add it over here. Right? SAP is disabled. So these are all the environments you can set over here. So what is the thing that you can do in the configure application? In configure application, so there are three things that we are seeing. One is configure application under configure menu. Right? So a configure application allows user to configure applications pertaining to default. This is what the certification questions will be. Generally, these areas we never given importance, remembering what is the content inside that. Whereas in certification, those are all the important areas. In project, of course, if you go to the menu, everything is visible. So allows user to configure the application pertaining to Java, HTML, right, and executable, any .exe file. Right? Java, HTML, executable, and you have web. HTML we have already covered. SAP. What is the last portion? I think it is SAP. Right? So you have provision to configure jar files, web HTML URL, executable.exe, and SAP modules if you have any. So this is configure application. Then we have environment. Environment, it will allow you to configure browsers, adding new browsers, right? Configuring the existing browser or testing, enabling the browser, etc. All these are available. Then you have a Java environment settings. Then you have this Java environment setting was not flexible it was not available as a setting in a rational clear quest. Because of that, if you don't set it properly, the rational clear quest doesn't work. Sometimes environment needs to be changed because the conflict happens between a different environment. For example, Oracle uses the same environment name. Maybe Java also uses the same environment name. Then you may have to force one of it to change the environment. So this becomes very important in that situation. Of course, this will be managed by your configuration team manager or a system admin guy. So Java environment, Eclipse, you have SAP GUI. So these are all the supported environments, and configure menu has all this. Third that we have seen is the test object configuration. They call it as test object map. The word used in RMQTP will be repository, right? So each technology uses their own wordings or terminologies. You need to be familiar with the terminology used by the respective tool. So test object configuration as a domain. Domain is nothing but add-in or a plugin or technology. You call it in any name. Right? Then you have a class. This class, standard classes are shown by default. Then you have properties to be configured. Right? So these are all some of the menu items that is available inside the. So I go to RFT back. So the configure menu has those important parts. Configure unexpected windows will go little later. So how to manage the configure unexpected windows will little later we'll take up this. Right now for timing we just go ahead with the normal process. Once you have done, we are ready now. Next is you can start recording the application. First, let me take the native application of so-called rational. Then I'll take up the calculator so that the understanding becomes easier. So record, when I click on the record, it will open up a record window. Meantime, if you have any questions on this configuration, you can start typing it onto the chat window. Right? Are those the only two browsers where you can test on for HTML kind of testing? The answer I said, you can add any browser. In my system, by the time I installed RFT, only these two browsers were present. That is why it has automatically added that browser into my environment settings. If you have added any browser after the RFT is installed, you can do it manually. You need to select that exe file or an extension of that particular invoking of that browser into the invoking exe of that browser automatically gets added over here. Right? Now, we are moving on to the next important topic. That is scripting. So you can see now when I select you can select the multiple projects. So I select the project 1 and you can see there are two modes of scripting. We are going to see how the two modes look like. That's all. Right? There are certain people very comfortable with simplified scripting. Certain people are comfortable with Java scripting. For rational functional tester, we always, it is individual preference. As a tester, if somebody asks me which one you use, I always prefer JavaScript. One that was JavaScripting was there from 6.0 version of rational functional tester. That is where I started my RFT use.